In a moment that left royal watchers breathless, Duchess Sophie, known for her steadfast loyalty, was nowhere to be seen at a high-profile state event. But this wasn't a quiet withdrawal. Her absence was calculated, chilling, and it all traces back to a bombshell claim made by Queen Camilla about a piece of jewellery that once sat on Queen Elizabeth's own skin. This isn't just about diamonds, it's about legacy, betrayal, and a power struggle the palace tried to bury. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. For over 2 decades, Duchess Sophie of Edinburgh has been the silent sentinel of the monarchy, devoted, unobtrusive, and unshakably loyal. So, when her name was quietly removed from the seating chart of a major royal engagement, insiders knew something was deeply wrong. The public was confused, the press was baffled, and the palace, ever so rehearsed, issued nothing more than a flat, carefully sterile acknowledgement of her absence. But beneath that silence, a storm had already erupted. Sources from inside the royal household leaked a private note attributed to someone within Sophie's own team, suggesting her absence stemmed from irreconcilable conduct by another senior royal. The phrase, sharp and surgical, hinted at a confrontation of unbearable weight. Whispers soon gave way to speculation, and attention turned to Queen Camilla, who had just appeared at that very event wearing a stunning vintage brooch long associated with Queen Elizabeth. This brooch wasn't simply a piece of decorative regalia, it was an heirloom of emotional gravity, a symbol that once adorned the late Queen during moments of private reflection and personal triumph. And now, Camilla had pinned it to her chest as if it were hers by right. But what sent shockwaves through the palace wasn't just the act of wearing it, it was her bold, almost offhand remark that followed. Camilla, surrounded by photographers and aides, reportedly stated that the brooch had been gifted to her by Her late Majesty herself, a token of trust and transition. The comment, dripping with subtext, implied finality ownership, not just of jewellery, but of the Queen's symbolic blessings. But there was a problem. No such gift had ever been confirmed, and those close to the late Queen insist she made very specific promises about her most personal pieces. Inside the Windsor walls, the tension was unbearable. Charles, notably quiet, offered no clarification. William and Catherine remained diplomatically distant. But Sophie? She refused to play along. Her absence wasn't a retreat, it was resistance. It was the loudest silence the monarchy had heard in years. But to understand the full weight of Sophie's silent protest, we must first uncover the secret bond she shared with the late Queen and why Camilla's words cut so deeply. What many outsiders never knew is that Duchess Sophie wasn't just a daughter-in-law to Queen Elizabeth. She was her confidant, her quiet strength, her shadow support during times of immense personal sorrow. Their connection was deeply personal, forged in the aftermath of scandal and silence. Camilla's recent maneuver doesn't just sting, it feels like theft of sacred memory. From the earliest days of her royal journey, Sophie stood apart not because she courted attention, but because she refused to. While others in the firm navigated headlines, outbursts, and shifting alliances, Sophie built something different. Trust. Queen Elizabeth, famously cautious, found in Sophie something rare, a daughter-in-law who didn't demand attention, who didn't chase titles or favour, but who served. Behind the scenes, their relationship blossomed into something uniquely private and unshakably loyal. When scandals erupted around Prince Andrew or tensions brewed between William and Harry, Sophie was often the unseen presence at the Queen's side, offering calm. In fact, insiders recall several key family milestones where the Queen, unable or unwilling to attend, sent Sophie in her place not as a formality, but as a signal. Balmoral christenings, private anniversaries, discreet family dinners. Sophie was there, always quietly, always meaningfully. Then came Prince Philip's death, and with it, a moment that changed everything. Amid the nation's mourning, a single letter was whispered about in royal circles, allegedly handwritten by Elizabeth herself and delivered privately to Sophie. It was said to be a note of deep gratitude, recognizing Sophie's strength during those grief-stricken days and hinting at personal treasures, jewels, heirlooms that the Queen wished her to have one day. Though the letter has never been seen by the public, those closest to Sophie speak of it with reverence, insisting that it exists, tucked away, protected. The most telling clue, perhaps, came in a set of recently surfaced photographs, taken during the Queen's final Balmoral retreat. In them, Elizabeth and Sophie are seen walking alone, their heads bowed in conversation, the Queen clutching Sophie's hand in a gesture of unusual intimacy. It was not a formal pose, it was a farewell. And now, months after the Queen's passing, the spectre of that farewell looms large. Sophie has not merely lost a monarch, she's lost a maternal figure, a guide, a keeper of mutual understanding. To see Camilla now stepping into that space, wearing items rumoured to have been privately promised elsewhere, is more than painful. It feels like trespass. And for Sophie, who has built her life on discretion and loyalty, this is not a wound that can be ignored. Her grief is no longer quiet, it is sharpened into a resolve to protect the memory of the woman she revered. And just when emotions seemed contained behind palace walls, a single brooch appears on Camilla's chest, setting off a chain reaction that no one could have predicted. It was more than a brooch, it was a weapon. When Camilla stepped out wearing Queen Elizabeth's favourite sapphire and diamond heirloom at a televised Commonwealth celebration, gasps rippled through the room. The Queen Consort smiled. But somewhere behind the scenes, Sophie's silence shattered into anger. What right did Camilla have to claim what was never hers? The brooch in question wasn't just an accessory, it was a cornerstone of royal symbolism. Queen Elizabeth wore it not in grand parades or ceremonial pomp, but during quiet moments that required poise, steel, and absolute moral clarity. It first gained significance during the Queen's solo visit to Ghana in the 1960 seconds, a pivotal diplomatic gesture in the Commonwealth's turbulent history. Historians say the sapphire's brilliance was always reserved for turning points, moments when the Queen had to speak softly yet command authority without uttering a word. To see that very emblem now nestled on Camilla's lapel, without warning or context, was like watching someone lay claim to a legacy they never earned. The royal household attempted to temper the shock by releasing a carefully crafted statement through Camilla's press office, calling the jewel a final bequest of Her late Majesty, entrusted to Queen Camilla in honour of continuity and unity. But behind that thin veil of protocol was a spark of audacity that ignited Sophie's outrage. According to insiders, Sophie received no forewarning, no consultation, only the brutal public spectacle of watching the brooch appear on someone she believed had no emotional right to it. And that fury didn't stay confined to whispers. Within hours of Camilla's appearance, Sophie's private office reportedly sent a terse email to palace event organisers, formally declining her attendance at an upcoming diplomatic gala. The timing was too exact, too surgical, for it to be coincidence. Leaked correspondence, later obtained by a senior aide and shared discreetly with members of the press, hinted at a growing, institutional disregard for legacy assignments made in confidence. The words dripped with implication. Sophie, long known for her restraint, had taken the gloves off, but with precision. Royal staff scrambled to manage the blowback, planting soft narratives in tabloids and attempting to shift focus toward Camilla's graceful performance at the event. But the damage was done. The symbolism of that brooch had already embedded itself in the public psyche, and so had the silence surrounding its rightful heir. Behind closed doors, tensions were no longer simmering, they were boiling. Aides were reportedly divided, factions forming quietly around Sophie's loyalty to the late Queen versus Camilla's growing consolidation of ceremonial power. And yet, amidst the spiraling drama, one chilling fact remained. Camilla hadn't yet revealed the full extent of her intentions. Because as the dust settled from the brooch scandal, those present at an off-the-record royal meeting would soon leak details that revealed something far more calculated, a strategy not just to wear the Queen's jewels, but to redefine who controlled her memory. But the jewelry is just the beginning, because what Camilla said behind closed doors after claiming the brooch reveals a far more ruthless strategy. Behind the palace's locked doors, Camilla convened a meeting with select advisors. No Charles, no Anne, and certainly no Sophie. Eyewitnesses say she declared that it was time the Queen's collection reflected the future, not the past. For some, it was practical. For others, it was war. The gathering wasn't on the official calendar, and the guest list read like a who's who of Camilla's inner circle, longtime confidantes, stylists with influence, and senior courtiers who had served her loyally since her earliest days within the firm. There were no heralds, no public record, just quiet power moves in a gilded room sealed from prying eyes. At the center of the agenda was one subject cloaked in elegance but soaked in politics: the Queen's private jewelry vault. What began as a discussion about modernization quickly evolved into something far more aggressive. Camilla reportedly criticized the current state of the late Queen's collection, implying that too many iconic items were gathering dust in the hands of those no longer central to the monarchy's future. Though no names were spoken, the insinuation was impossible to miss. Sophie was being targeted. According to a leaked transcript shared discreetly with a foreign journalist, Camilla is said to have uttered 7 chilling words that echoed like a thunderclap across the monarchy. "What's in the vault is now mine to decide." It was a line that didn't merely assert control, it redefined legacy. Among the items discussed for reassignment were not just forgotten pieces, but major historical gems, most notably the Queen Mother's prized emeralds, once reserved for rare and significant appearances. Rumors began swirling that Camilla intended to place them into a new, streamlined rotation of high-visibility adornments for the modern monarchy. But beneath the surface of this rebranding was a strategy designed to cement her presence not as a placeholder, not as a consort, but as the final arbiter of the Queen's symbolism. The timing, the precision, the secrecy, it all pointed to a larger campaign to shift the monarchy's emotional center of gravity away from the past and toward a future shaped by Camilla's narrative. But outside the walls of that private meeting, ripples began to form. Royal watchers, long trained to read between the lines, noticed a subtle shift in tone from Clarence House. The soft tributes to Queen Elizabeth that had once lingered were now replaced with phrases like evolving institution and modernized continuity. The jewelry became a symbol, yes, but of something much deeper. A silent coup, not of power, but of meaning. It wasn't about diamonds or brooches. It was about rewriting memory in the language of gemstones. And in the shadows of this carefully orchestrated move, a quiet resistance was forming. Because while Camilla played offense behind closed doors, Sophie had begun reaching out to those who shared her reverence for the Queen's legacy. And to her surprise, one of them was someone whose voice carried unmatched weight within the royal family, a woman unafraid to confront power, no matter how gilded it might appear. As Camilla draws the battle lines in diamonds and rubies, Sophie begins quietly rallying allies and finds an unexpected supporter in Princess Anne. She's known as the Iron Royal Stoic, no-nonsense, and fiercely private. But when Princess Anne learned of Camilla's actions, something cracked. In a move no one saw coming, Anne made a private visit to Bagshot Park. What was said in that hour between sisters-in-law would ignite a quiet resistance within the palace walls. For decades, Anne has been the monarchy's most unshakable presence. While others stumbled through scandal or clung to ceremony, she earned respect through blunt dedication and an unflinching work ethic. She never sought the crown's spotlight, yet she has always commanded its dignity. Her relationship with Camilla, though civil in public, has long been marked by a certain distance, a cool professionalism that masked deeper skepticism. Anne, after all, was forged in the image of her mother, and that image did not favor performative charm. When word of Camilla's secret meeting and the jewelry redistribution plan reached her ears, Anne didn't raise her voice, but she acted. Without press or protocol, she arrived at Bagshot Park. No aides, no agenda. Just 2 women bound by duty, but divided by allegiance. What passed between Anne and Sophie in that secluded conversation was never officially recorded, but insiders describe it as the turning point. Anne listened. Sophie, emotional but measured, reportedly laid out her fears that Elizabeth's legacy was being hollowed out, that trust built over years was being erased with a single pin on a lapel. In response, Anne is said to have uttered a sentence that now echoes like prophecy. "My mother knew who to trust, and who not to." That phrase, quietly repeated in the corridors of power, sent ripples through the House of Windsor. In the days that followed, subtle shifts became visible. At a high-profile equestrian event, Anne, who had always shared a diplomatic nod with Camilla, walked past her without so much as a glance. The gesture, though minor, was unmistakable. The tabloids began to hum with speculation, pointing out that for the first time in years, the senior royal women were no longer appearing united. At a recent garden party, Anne was seen sharing an unusually long conversation with Sophie, while Camilla stood alone at the opposite end of the marquee. Palace insiders claim that what's forming behind the scenes isn't rebellion, it's preservation. A deliberate, strategic stand against the rewriting of tradition, carried out not through noise but through action. The media, sensing the tension, began to speak of a growing anti-Camilla faction among the senior women of the firm, led not by whispers, but by the steady gaze of the Princess Royal and the unshakable resolve of the Duchess of Edinburgh. What had started as a silent protest was now becoming something harder to ignore. But Camilla was never one to be outmaneuvered without striking back. And just as this quiet alliance began gaining strength, the first signs of retaliation emerged not against Anne, but against Sophie. Targeted, personal, and calculated to inflict maximum damage. But as the private feud spills into public view, a cunning counterstrike is launched, one aimed directly at Sophie's reputation. Suddenly, stories start appearing. Whispers of entitlement, claims that Sophie never earned her place. A brutal narrative emerges from the shadows, targeting the Duchess's integrity. But these aren't organic headlines, they're orchestrated, and the fingerprints behind them lead dangerously close to Camilla's media machine. At first, it seemed like a coincidence, an offhand remark in a mid-tier tabloid questioning whether Sophie's rise had been quietly padded by favoritism from the late Queen. Headlines began framing her as aloof, labelling her out of step with the modern monarchy and failing to connect with a younger Britain. The language was measured, but the message was unmistakable. Sophie was being dismantled by narrative. Then came the whispers of internal unrest, suggestions that she had become difficult during royal engagements, inflexible with protocol, increasingly distant from senior courtiers. The portrayal felt eerily familiar to those who remembered similar campaigns used to erode public support for other women who had challenged the palace's unspoken rules. But this time, the smearing wasn't coming from faceless sources, it had a direction. A royal aide, whose proximity to Camilla had long been noted, was caught communicating with a known pro-Camilla columnist. Emails leaked from a disgruntled staffer revealed a troubling pattern. Deliberate briefings, framed to appear like spontaneous gossip, all pointing in one direction: Sophie. While Camilla herself remained polished and composed in public, the narrative, being quietly fed to the press, painted her as the gracious peacemaker, while Sophie was framed as cold and possessive, unwilling to share in the Queen's legacy. The damage began to show. Invitations once extended to Sophie with regularity were quietly rescinded or downgraded. One insider described a noticeable chill in palace communications, as if her loyalty had suddenly become a liability. And yet, through it all, Sophie said nothing. No interviews, no clarifications, no anonymous rebuttals. She held her silence, not out of weakness, but out of principle. Her refusal to play the palace's media games became its own quiet resistance. But silence carries a cost. Friends close to the Duchess said she was betrayed and devastated, shocked by the speed and cruelty of the narrative shift. Some worried she was being isolated, forced into the same emotional exile others had faced before her. Behind the gates of Bagshot Park, the tension was suffocating. Calls for an internal investigation were quietly made, but nothing moved forward. No one wanted to admit there was a battle being waged from within. The firm thrives on unity, or at least the illusion of it. But illusion wasn't enough anymore. Sophie knew the rules of the royal game, She had followed them longer, more loyally than most. And now, as she watched her reputation unravel under a campaign she didn't deserve, she made a decision, one that would reject quiet suffering and usher in a reckoning the monarchy hadn't anticipated. But the Duchess is far from defeated, because her next move won't be in secret, it will be public. And it will change everything. The world was watching, and Sophie knew it. As the camera panned across the royal front row during the remembrance ceremony, one seat remained chillingly empty. Reserved for the Duchess of Edinburgh, a single symbol of defiance against Camilla's growing power broadcast to millions. For the first time in over a decade, Sophie's RSVP read, "Declined." No excuse, no explanation, just absence. But in the House of Windsor, silence is never just silence, it's a message. And Sophie's message was crystal clear. The empty chair wasn't forgotten, it was reserved. It sat between the senior royals, visibly vacant, with her name etched on the itinerary. The optics were impossible to ignore. The press pounced. Within minutes, social media lit up with theories, most pointing to the escalating tensions that had only recently begun to surface. Whispers of royal conflict became thunderous speculation. Had Sophie finally drawn her line in the sand? Was this her reply to the smear campaign, to the jewellery controversy, to Camilla's tightening grip on the Queen's legacy? Viewers around the world fixated not on the ceremony, but on that vacant seat. It became a symbol of protest, of principle, of power denied and dignity reclaimed. Then came the photographs. Camilla, caught mid-expression, looking visibly shaken as the cameras turned toward Sophie's empty place. Her smile, once steady, faltered just long enough to spark even more questions. Commentators noted her sudden stiffness, the strain around her eyes, the subtle shift in posture that betrayed more than words ever could. Meanwhile, the internet erupted. The hashtag number #StandWithSophie trended across platforms as thousands shared their support for the Duchess, praising her quiet courage and condemning what many now saw as an unjust campaign to erase her place in the royal narrative. Memes, opinion pieces, and video breakdowns dissected the moment frame by frame. Even long-time royalists, normally reserved, began questioning the palace's silence. And that silence? It was deafening. Not a single comment was issued. No denial. No clarification. Nothing. Buckingham Palace, for all its practiced poise, was cornered. Because to respond would be to admit that the rift was real. And to ignore it only confirmed what millions had already begun to suspect. The royal family was fracturing, and Sophie was no longer playing by their rules. It was about presence, about who stands in the memory of Queen Elizabeth and who merely wears her jewels. And in that quiet act of non-attendance, Sophie reclaimed the narrative that had been slipping from her hands. Yet as the tides of public sympathy swelled in her favour, something else stirred behind the scenes. A figure not often involved in these storms was watching, calculating, preparing to speak. And when he did, the impact would be seismic. As public support swings in Sophie's favour, a surprising figure enters the fray, one whose words could end Camilla's reign of quiet control. He's the future king, but more importantly, he was the Queen's grandson. When Prince William takes a private meeting with Sophie just days after the empty seat scandal, speculation runs wild. And when he's later seen escorting Sophie to an event Camilla was excluded from, the message is unmistakable. The Queen's legacy must be protected. The meeting took place behind closed doors at Kensington Palace, but the repercussions spilled far beyond its walls. Prince William, normally restrained when it comes to internal family matters, took an extraordinary step, summoning Duchess Sophie for what insiders describe as a lengthy and emotionally charged conversation. It wasn't a casual catch-up. This was deliberate, purposeful, a gesture heavy with symbolism. According to one source close to the meeting, William reportedly said, "Gran made her wishes known, and it's time they were honoured." Those words would become the heartbeat of a new chapter in this royal standoff. For years, William has walked the fine line between tradition and reform. But in that moment, he made a choice: to protect the legacy of the woman who shaped his values, and to side with the one person brave enough to defend it when no one else would. What followed was a public appearance that felt more like a proclamation. William and Sophie, side by side at a charity event long associated with Queen Elizabeth, with Camilla notably absent from the invitation list. The press took notice immediately. And so did Camilla. Behind palace doors, sources say she was incandescent, furious that William had not only stepped into the arena, but had done so without consulting the king. But what truly rocked the foundations wasn't the optics, it was the leak. A confidential memo from Kensington Palace, obtained by a senior courtier and leaked to a royal correspondent, hinted at a forthcoming realignment of ceremonial protocols, particularly in regard to the stewardship of the Queen's private collection. It didn't mention Camilla by name, but the subtext was unmistakable. A shift was coming, one that could quietly remove certain pieces from Camilla's rotation and restore them to the designated legacy line, widely interpreted as a nod to Sophie. The move sent shockwaves through the institution. For years, Camilla's growing presence had gone largely unchallenged within royal circles, but William's intervention was a direct confrontation not in words, but in actions. And it didn't stop there. Days later, in an unexpected interview, William publicly praised Sophie, calling her one of the most loyal and dignified members of our family, a line that lit up headlines and silenced critics. It wasn't flattery, it was a signal, one that said Sophie was no longer alone, that the smear campaign, the whispers, the erasure, they would not go unanswered. The public rallied behind them. Polls showed a spike in support for Sophie, while commentators began dissecting the growing divide between Charles's cautious diplomacy and William's more assertive stance on legacy. The crown, it seemed, was being shaped in real time, not just by blood, but by belief. Yet even as William's support emboldened her, Sophie remained silent. Until now, and just when the storm seemed to reach its peak, Sophie finally breaks her silence with words that leave the palace trembling. In a rare, quietly devastating interview, Sophie looks directly into the camera and says, "I will not be erased from the legacy I helped protect." It's not just a message to Camilla, it's a message to the monarchy itself. The interview, recorded in a discreet corner of Bagshot Park, was not a palace-sanctioned production. It was Sophie's choice, her words, her timing. For weeks, she had endured headlines aimed to diminish, whispers meant to isolate, and decisions crafted to exclude. But what she gave the world wasn't retaliation, it was remembrance. With her voice steady but unmistakably raw, she spoke not of rivalry, but of loyalty to the woman who had believed in her when the world barely noticed her presence. Sophie recalled with emotion the last private conversation she shared with Queen Elizabeth, a moment etched into her memory with the kind of weight that changes everything. "She asked me to look after the things that mattered to her," Sophie said softly, "and I promised I would. Not just the objects, but the meaning behind them." That promise had become a burden in recent months, but now it was also her shield. She spoke of duty, not glamour, of tradition, not ego, and in one of the most cutting lines of the entire interview she declared, "I won't play politics with memory. I won't wear someone else's crown to feel seen." The audience was stunned, not by theatrics, but by truth. The Duchess had shattered the illusion of passivity. Public response was immediate and overwhelming. Social media flooded with praise. Headlines shifted tone. Commentators who had once dismissed her as peripheral were now calling her the unexpected conscience of the monarchy. Inside the palace, the interview was viewed as a direct challenge, but also a moment of reckoning. Rumours began to swirl that King Charles, deeply unsettled by the growing fracture within his family, had stepped in privately. Some say he reached out to Sophie in a personal phone call. Others claim a quiet directive was issued to temper future public appearances by Camilla, at least temporarily. Damage control, yes, but also an admission. The old rules no longer applied. And just before the interview ended, Sophie delivered one final blow, not of anger, but of truth. "The jewels," she said, "are not the crown. The crown is what we uphold." It was a declaration of values over vanity, of service over spectacle, a reminder that true royalty isn't worn, it's carried. And in that moment, the Duchess of Edinburgh didn't just reclaim her voice, she reminded the world of what the crown was always meant to be. As the dust settles, one thing is clear: the monarchy is evolving, but not without resistance, reckoning, and revelation. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.